citizens, them being the policy. So it's not a question about us being the citizens and them being the policymakers. No, it is not about that. It is actually about together forming a collective political group, a political demos, as we like to say very often. Keywords, we're going to talk about institutions, see the Commission, what does the European Parliament do, the Council of the European Union and the European Council. I'm referring to the main institutions. There are also several secondary institutions. On top of that, how public policy making is made at the EU level, and what are the decision-making rules? So broadly, a little bit of everything institutional speaking. And now we will start with a few comments on the historical overview. What is the EU actually? How did it all begin back in the 50s? And then move on to how does it operate. But before doing that, I will like you to participate in the first poll. And the first poll is this one. I would like you to go to this website, www.menti.com, and use this number. You can do it by your smartphone or your computer. And I would like you to respond to this simple question. How many Nobel Prize winners do you think there exist in this group? In our group, we are 32 participants in this group. So please type the website Menti.com and use this code. As you are approaching, as you are responding, your responses will show up in this in the screen, in my screen and in your screen. So let's give you 1 second to familiarize with yourself. If you can do it, please. That will be very helpful. www
in the chat
here.
And the number, because we cannot see your screen. We're just seeing the PowerPoint right now. So if you could share.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, stop sharing. I will stop. I shared my screen, so for a moment I thought that I was sharing my screen, but maybe okay. Now it must be better. Here, can you see now?
Yeah, it's good.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the interruption and for the intervention. Better. So .menti.com and use this code. Zero. 3 to 5. Very ambitious. Really? Are you joking? That's the answer actually I was expecting most to occur. Are you joking? No, I'm not. The answer. So far we have 9 responses. Let's wait a little bit longer, 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. So it seems that a few of you are very much think that I'm joking, and actually I don't. I think that I would feel the same in your place. 0, you are polite. Yes, you know that there are no Nobel Prize winners in this group because it's very difficult to have that. But some of you are actually very optimistic. 6 of you believe that there are 3 to 5 Nobel Prize winners. And I think I will stop sharing now and continue with the presentation, because the reason why I ask you to change your names and actually to add your country origins behind next to your names is very much related to this question. And the reason why is this related to this question is because EU as a collective political entity has actually won, has been granted the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2012. Now, this tells us a lot about what the EU is supposed to be. The EU has began as a peace project. And the Nobel Prize was actually granted to the EU for what the EU is, not for what the EU does, not for its peacekeeping or peace settlement initiatives, but because the EU has brought peace in the European continent that 70 years before the 1950s had met with at least three big wars: Second World War, First World War, and the Franco-Prussian war back in the end of the 19th century. So this prize actually was a prize for the EU for being able to stabilize at least the western part of the region, and it belongs to all EU citizens. So all of us that are European citizens, EU citizens, have a passport from a member state of the European Union, are actually Nobel Prize winners. So you can go back home and claim, look, I have a Nobel Prize. And I think this is important, not only in its symbolic terms, but mostly in symbolic terms, of course, but also because it gives us a feeling of this European political entity. So the European Union is a sui generis political entity. What do we mean by this sui generis? It's a Latin term. And by that, we mean that it is something in between a state, a federal state, a federation like the United States of America, for example, or like Germany, which is also a federation, and an international organization like the United Nations, for example. It's something in between. It's more than an international organization, but it's less than a federal state, right? So this is where we stand, and this is our starting point. Now, let's say a few words about the historical background, just very quickly. Why did it all begin? Because exactly we tried, the policy founders, the fathers of the European integration process in the 50s wanted to bring peace and stability in the region. And there was a lot of political and economic factors behind that, starting from the international power balance, the Cold War, USA versus Soviet Union. We had the problem of Germany and how Germany should be accommodated in the European power structure. And we had economic interdependence stemming from initiatives like the Bretton Woods institutions, the Marshall Plan. All these were economic initiatives to help rebuild European Union. And all these attempts pointed to the same direction: cooperation, interdependence. And interdependence, economic and political, led us to where we stand now. That's, as a starting point for our discussion. Now, please feel free to interrupt and intervene if you want to clarify something, or if you would like to discuss something more. Now, that's how we started, but things have evolved. And they have evolved in the last 70 years, from the 50s to 2020, through treaty development, through deepening of the cooperation. So we started in the 50s with cooperation in a very small area, coal and steel. And from that point on, we have expanded our cooperation in many, many different areas. Almost all areas of everyday life nowadays are somehow affected by policy decisions at the European level. To your left, you can see the treaty developments. You can see how treaties have been produced or negotiated and agreed from the 50s onwards. And what we can see that after 1990, in particular after the Maastricht Treaty in 1991, we have a lot of attempts to reform, revise this big European deal. And I'm going to ask you, once I finish the presentation, why do you think this is so? Why after the 1991, after the Maastricht Treaty, we have so many difficulties or so many challenges, let's say, that we need to overcome by investing on new treaties? I will come back to that. Keep that in a mental note. Start thinking. I will ask you at the end as a first reflection point. Is there a pattern, and why is there a pattern, right? So that's in terms of an introduction. Let's move on to the institutional structure, which is actually the main topic of our discussion today. Overview. Let's have, first of all, overview of the EU institutions. Now, there are two clusters of institutions, two groups of institutions, right? We have one group of institutions, which we call the supranational bodies, to which we as states have given power and authority to take decisions in our names, in the names of the states. And we have the second cluster of institutions, sorry, which are the intergovernmental institutions in which member states are predominant. They decide, member states decide by themselves. So supranational bodies, intergovernmental bodies, two different worlds. And the European Union is the mixture, the intersection of these two different worlds. In the first world, at the supranational world, decisions are not controlled by member states. At the intergovernmental world, the member states, the governments, are responsible for all decisions reached. And we will see how these decisions are made. Okay, clear so far? Any questions? I take your silence for no, but if I'm wrong, please interrupt me. 20 seconds, a small break just to absorb this information. Two big clusters of institutions, supranational, intergovernmental. Now, who does what in this system? Let's go back a little, 4 centuries, back to Montesquieu, one of the big philosophers of the Enlightenment period, who first made this distinction between the executive branch of power, the legislative branch of power, and the judicial branch of power. Meaning what? Executive. Executive is the government, the people who are responsible for implementing the laws. The legislative branch are the legislative bodies, those who are making the laws. In most systems, laws are made by the parliaments. Okay, you may have one parliament. In some cases, we may have 2 parliaments, but this is the legislative function, right? And then you have the judicial function, the judicial branch, which is usually the courts of justice, Supreme Court, and so on and so forth, High Court, depending on the specifics of its country. So who is the executive branch? Who is the government of the European Union, simply put? The government of the European Union is the Commission. The Commission is responsible for the everyday management of what we know as European Union. Who is the legislative branch? Who is passing laws, in other words? We have 2 bodies that are passing laws. One body is the Council of Ministers, and the other body is the European Parliament. These are the 2 bodies, the 2 institutions that need to work together, and they need to cooperate in order to pass legislation. And bear in mind, please, that they belong to 2 different worlds. The European Parliament belongs to the supranational body, is a supranational body. The Council of Ministers is an intergovernmental body. So this is one of the points of friction. This is a moment, this is an area in which the 2 worlds, the supranational world and the intergovernmental world, interact and often fight each other. Who is going to dominate? Are member states going to direct the process, or is the European Parliament going to direct the process? And the judicial branch, as I said, we have the European Court of Justice, who is actually responsible for granting, for checking whether the laws are implemented in the right way. Now, if someone pays a closer look to this cluster, you would see that we have also the European Council. The European Council is what? The European Council is a body that is somehow outside this structure. What I mean by that? I mean that the European Council, which consists of the heads of state, the prime ministers, it's the Spanish prime minister, it's the French president, it's the German chancellor, and so on and so forth. So these heads of state or government, they meet together at the European Council level, and they do what? They take strategic decisions. They offer their political strategic guidance. They make this kind of big deals, these big agreements. Where do we want the European Union to head? For example, Do we want another round of enlargement? The European Council will decide. And then the other bodies, the Commission, the Council of Ministers, the European Parliament, will implement this decision. So the European Council takes the big decisions, and the other bodies will make sure that they will implement it. Okay, so political strategic guidance by the European Council. And how do we make decisions? Well, first of all, we have three ways in which the Council, together with the European Parliament, reach decisions, and the most important one of the three is the co-decision, the last one, the ordinary process. This is what I will come back with a nice graph in a short while. But the most important thing to understand is how we take decisions within the Council of Ministers. And we may use simple majority, we use unanimity often, which means that we all need to agree, but the most frequent method is special majority. And there we use two criteria. So in the Council of Ministers, we need to agree 55 of member states and 65% of EU population. These are the two criteria that need to apply at the same time, simultaneously. For example, we have a meeting of the Council of Ministers deciding on sanctions to Russia. Well, maybe sanctions to Russia, I take that out because it's a foreign policy and there we decide by unanimity. Decide on the energy cap, shall we have a kind of a common energy policy. And we have a piece of legislation that is going to be discussed. We make the tour de table, we express our positions, and then there is a time of voting. In order for this legislation to pass, to be approved, in other words, we need to have the agreement of 55% of member states. So at least 14 members need to agree, at least. A number of member states that will agree will definitely have to be more than 65% of the EU population. So 55% of member states, and these member states that agree should have a population of more than 65% of the total EU population. So this double criterion, double majority criterion is also needs some further reflections. Why do we complicate our lives? Is it more democratic like that? Is it safer for some member states like that? Why? Let's leave that as another reflection point for the future. Okay. Again, short break just to grasp all that and digest a little bit and perhaps come back with questions so far. So please feel free to ask for any clarification or any point that you would like to go back and stress. Let's give one moment for reflection and for feedback so far.
I would like to ask
Yes, please.
a question. When you cited the example federal state and like USA and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So does it mean that there are laws exactly at the federal level and at the state level?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Indeed.
the way?
Indeed.
Okay.
You have at the federal, there are two levels of policy making. You have the local, regional, state level, for example, in the state of California or in the Bavaria in Germany or in any other region. They have their local, let's say, parliaments. They make local decisions for a number of issues, but for a few issues, topics, decisions and laws are made at the central level of policy making, that is at the Congress in the US or at the Bundesrat or Bundestag in the German system.
Okay, so it works like that within the EU as well. There are there is some legislation where member states are left to their own decisions, and there are
Actually-
other fields.
Mhm.
Okay.
Actually, more than 90%, or perhaps I'm exaggerating, but I would say 90%, keep that as a thumb of rule number. Topics at this level, 90% of topics are actually EU policy made,
Okay.
right? There are very, very few issues, thematic areas, in which the EU has no power whatsoever. Very, very few.
Okay,
And
thank
the
you.
educational system and the education culture, these are topics that are social security. These are topics that still remain at the national level of policymaking. But for all the others, environment, energy, transportation, fisheries, agricultural policy, industrial policy, competition policy, you name it, all these topics are nowadays decided primarily at Brussels, at the European policy making system, let's say. That's why it is so important to understand how it works, right? Because it affects almost all aspects of everyday life.
Yes, thank you. The percentages are very interesting. In
yeah.
fact, thank you.
It's approximate percentage, of course. These are not accurate, but I just to give you an idea of how much of our everyday life is actually decided upon at Brussels level. Other questions? Are there any? Okay, so let's move on and see a little bit in depth what the European, what these institutions are doing actually in more detail. Can you see? I think it's, is it okay? Yeah?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, great. So we have seen that. So let's start from the Commission. What did we say that the Commission is? The Commission is the government of the European Union, you know, responsible for the everyday decision making, policy making at the European level. So it's the executive branch of government, the Commission. The motto, if you want to have in one single word, in one single sentence, how the system works, the Commission proposes, and the Council and the European Parliament decides. So the Commission is responsible for making suggestions, and then the two legislative bodies, the Council and the European Parliament, decide upon those suggestions of the Commission. It is the main expression, it's the most supranational element, most supranational institutional body of the European process. It has a collective responsibility. And what do I mean by collective responsibility? And I will explain that in more detail, because I think this is the most important part. The commissioners, first of all, there is one commissioner per member state. So there are 27 commissioners nowadays. Each commissioner has a certain portfolio. For example, there is a commissioner responsible for common agricultural policy, right? Once a policy proposal is discussed at the Commission, all commissioners will take the decision together as a collective body. And they will vote, perhaps, because maybe there are disagreements. Maybe some things think that this is not the right proposal, or this is not the right way to go forward. So they will vote, but we, the European demos, the citizens, will never find out how the commissioners have voted, because they have a collective responsibility. What we will find out, and what we will learn actually, is at the end of the day, that the Commission put forward this certain proposal. They have a collective responsibility, and the reason is, why is there such a collective responsibility, and why the intra-Commission voting is not revealed? I will give you the answer right away, because I think it's very important to understand what the Commission is and what the Commission is not. Look a little bit at this last but one bullet point. The commissioners, they are national, they have a national hat, of course. They are Greeks, they are Spaniards, they are German, they are Austrians, they are Estonians, and so on. But they are not there, they are not in the Commission in order to push forward their national interests. They are not national representatives. They are there to ensure the general interest of the Union. And that's exactly why voting is not revealed at the Commission. Because imagine, for example, having one topic that is not very well appraised at one country, in Bulgaria. And the Bulgarian commissioner actually votes against what the Bulgarian government might actually wish. If this voting was revealed, a lot of pressure would be exercised upon him. Why did you vote against the interests of your country? Well, the idea is that the Bulgarian commissioner, as very much like all other commissioners, do not represent their countries. They represent the general interest of the European Union, all of us, not only their co-citizens, national co-citizens. So it is very important actually to have that in mind. I'm moving forward to what the Commission does. It proposes policies and legislations. It does not decide upon them. It implements them. And that's exactly why we're saying it has executive functions. It implements a decision, and it is the guardian of the legal framework of the European Union. Okay? Thank you. So let's move on fast to the Council of Ministers now. Could we
Please, I will put off the maker.
Thank you, thank you. So, Council of Ministers, the second important institutional body. It comes from the intergovernmental world. It represents national interests, member states. It's where we see the ministers of different groupings, of the different sectors, participate in meetings at the European level, trying to push forward their national interests. The Irish Minister of Transport will push forward the Irish interests in this field, and so on and so forth. So this is the main area where member states' interests and preferences are actually pursued, are actually put forward. We have different formats and configurations. You can see them in the slide. I'm not going to go through them. What do they do? What does the Council of Ministers do? The functions, that is, it's one of the two legislators. It decides upon legislation. It has a few executive functions in the field of foreign and security area only, and it is the main forum where different interests, member states' interests, are actually brought together. The osmosis, the amalgamation, and the different compromises are actually done and reached in this Council of Ministers. So it is one of the main fora of negotiations among member states at the EU level. Council of Ministers, that is. European Parliament, again, a supranational body, meaning that it represents the whole European demos, not member states. It is a co-legislator. It makes legislative decisions. It passes laws together with the Council of Ministers. It began as a secondary body. In its original formations in the 50s and 60s, it had a very, very secondary, only advisory role. Nowadays, its role is critical because they are at the same level with the Council of Ministers, and they discuss and negotiate together in order to pass laws. So that's why it is very important not only to look at the Council of Ministers, but also to look at the European Parliament. Many different things it does. It is very loosely structured around party federations. That's what we're voting for at the European elections. We have party federations. Unfortunately, participation in the European elections is very, very low. That tells a lot about how much aware we are about the importance of the European Parliament. The answer is that we, as citizens of the European Union, we don't actually understand the extremely significant role of the European Parliament in this process. It's extremely significant. It's a co-legislator. It's at an equal footing. It's our opportunity as citizens to send someone there in order to represent us, the citizens, and not member states. Okay, it has a huge difference. And I think to cut a long story short and have some more opportunities for discussion, I will jump to the conclusions and then come back with comments and everything that you would like to discuss. Now, the European integration is a process, and please bear that in mind. It's a very dynamic process, so it constantly evolves. Remember reflection point 1? Why do we have so many treaties? We are looking for something that we haven't found yet. What is this something? I will ask you in a short while. We continuously debate, negotiate, interact, expand, bring more members in, go deeper down in cooperation, bring more focus, thematic areas in the discussion. So all that entails a very dynamic process. Member states hold the key, but also the national political demos also hold the key. Us, the citizens, by participating in the many different opportunities we have to form the policy making, the content of the policy making. And as I hope it has become evident so far, all that system is very complex. And this sometimes scares us and frightens us and distances us from the European Union. So that's exactly why we should invest more time on familiarizing ourselves with the institutions and how they work, and understand how much important they are for our everyday life. And I think this is the main takeaway that I would like you to get out of this discussion. And I hope I didn't bore you to death. The fact that it's a constantly evolving process, and we as citizens, we have many opportunities to join this policy-making process. Thank you for your attention, and don't hesitate to contact me in case you would like to discuss something further. This was my part, and now your part comes into the discussion. I'm stop sharing now, and I do have some questions for you to reflect. But first of all, let's see if you would like to ask something on any of the topics that we have discussed so far. Questions?
Everyone, it's the time to
I would have,
yes,
Anthony? I would have a question, because in your fifth reflection point, you talk about the possibility of differentiated integration, but you haven't quite touched on differentiated integration yet. And so I was wondering, before we could go into the discussion of this reflection one, because it's one that I find very important for EU policy and for member state cooperation, could you give a short overview of what this term might mean and the implications thereof? Okay, thank you for the question. It's actually one of the choices that I had to make, painful choices, what to say and what to leave aside. But I'm glad that you raised that point. What is differentiated integration? The European integration process began in the 50s with 6 members. These 6 members were very homogeneous. It was Germany, Western Germany only at that time, France, Italy, and the 3 Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. 6 countries. These were the original 6 members. Now, from 6, we are now 27, which means that the heterogeneity of the group has really gone high. Different countries, different perspectives, different structures, different mentalities, different. A point for reflection is, can we continue all 27 together? Or is it somehow meaningless to go this way? Can we still find common issues that can bring all 27 together? Let's say response against Russians' aggression, or investment on a single tax base, common tax for everybody at all levels. So these are topics that are very divisive. One group of people believe that yes, we should try that, and we should try move all together at the same pace. Another group of people and countries and governments believe that no, we shouldn't.
we should make subgroups. And, you know, those who want to go further, they will go further and faster. Those who want to be left behind, they will have a kind of loser attachment. So this is differentiated integration. There is no right or wrong, right? This is a point for reflection. There are good arguments for the first option, and there are good arguments for the second option as well. So it's a question of what we may think that is better for our countries, ourselves, our European continent, whatever. I would like to hear your view, though, if you feel like responding. Anthony, would you like to take the floor, or do you want some more time to digest it?
No. This was a big question, and I did a master's in South European studies, and so of course the question of differentiated integration was a very important one, which is why I was very passionate. But I think Victoria raised her hand first,
Yes,
so she should
Victoria
have the first
Okay.
go.
All right, Victoria, please go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for this wonderful meeting. I would like to make a question or a remark, or you can call it whatever you want. So this differentiated, let's say, integration, do you think that that it exacerbates more the gap in democratic representation of the European people?
Mm-hmm.
I won't use the term government or countries. I will use the word European people. What is your comment on this?
I think there is no free lunch. Okay, so there is always a trade-off between two things. One thing is efficiency. Can we reach decisions? How fast can we reach decisions? How responsive can we be to modern challenges, crises like the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, for example? So one part is efficiency and effectiveness. And the other part, of course, is democratic representation and democracy. How representative is the European Union? How democratic is its functioning, and so on and so forth. I will try to compromise the two versions. So the thing, bring together differentiated integration, or rather say that differentiated integration is not so bad for democracy and for the equal participation of member states, as long as, and this is a big if and conditional sentence, as long as the clusters do communicate. If we are talking about isolated clusters, so the haves and the have-nots, and the haves go fast ahead and they are progressing, they have high growth rates and they prosper, and the have-nots are actually suffering from their marginalization, then obviously this is not acceptable. If, however, we have kind of links and channels, conditions, you need, like, for example, the conditions we have for the Eurozone membership, or the conditions we have for entering European Union, the eligibility criteria of Copenhagen. If you want to join, if one country wants to join the European Union, there are certain ticks that has to fulfill. So if we have certain clear criteria, and these are not political decisions, but decisions based on that meritocratic criteria, then I can see somehow bridging the gap between the groups. Okay, so it's a kind of in-between answer. There is no black and white, you can imagine. There are always, you know, shades of gray in different perspectives. So it's your call. Where do you want to direct your attention? By the way, and before asking for more questions, I would like your second contribution. I'm sharing again a second poll that I would like to ask you to participate. Again, the same logic, same direction, but it's a different code. The 3 words that describe best the EU for you. 3 words. What is the EU for you? You have 3 words, 3 keywords, let's say, and we will see how they will. Can you see that? Yes, I think that you can see the code and everything.
Yes, everything is perfect.
Great. So I would like to hear from you. What is the EU for? Because for a few people, it's institutions. For a few others, it's a symbol. For a few others, it's peace. For a few others, economic prosperity. What is it for you? Stability. Okay. You have 3. You can enter 3 words, 3 different words. So. you can imagine that there is no right or wrong here. Okay, it's what I'm trying to give you here is, and if there are some words that are being repeated, then you will see them in the center, meaning that they are mentioned by more than one participants. Alliance, institutions, empire. That's interesting. Is the UN empire, and in which sense? We have the post-historic government, a kind of meta government, a meta postmodern government. Again, that needs a lot of discussions, of course. Economic growth is there, quality of life, free movement, transparency, bureaucracy. Yes, fully agree. Civic values. Stability remains at the center, and I don't think this has to do with because it was the first word that was written. Obviously, it has been taken up by more than one person, and that's why you can see that it's a little bit. It's at the center of this graph. Democracy, yes. You know, we have the luxury of discussing about how democratic the EU is, and I'm saying we have the luxury because we have elections and we are complaining why we don't participate in the elections. We have accountability, the European Parliament controlling the Commission for what it does and for what it doesn't do, or the European Parliament and the Commission controlling together Frontex and the mismanagement in the different agencies of the European Union and actually forcing the head of these agencies to resign. So we do have accountability, we do have control, we do have checks and balances in this system, as I described it earlier, but we have the luxury to complain about their quality of operating, which is good. And I think that we should raise the standards, but we should not forget that if we take a macroscopic perspective, we zoom out and we look what is going on around us in the neighborhood, Russia, Turkey, some countries in Northern Africa, around the globe more generally, we will find out that democracy and these democratic regimes, civic values, they are not, they should not be taken for granted. And we do have these cases within the European family as well. And we have cases, member states, that are actually accused by other institutions and by other member states that they are actually breaking these civic values. And we are now in the process of putting pressure to these governments to change their policies. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm saying that we are one step higher, at least one step higher than what is going on in the rest of the world. Don't go far away, just look at the decision of the Supreme Court in the US on the right to abortion. And this is a very divisive issue. And of course, it should be discussed and further discussed and elaborated again and again and again. But we take things for granted, I think, and this should not be so. Other questions? I will stop sharing because I want you to focus in the third question to something similar to that, but have a kind of negative outlook twist. Questions, please.
I have a question.
Thank you.
About what you were saying, that people do not really understand that they have a big role to play in their relationship with the EU. Don't you think that the EU should make a point to show that it is present, it is a reality, have exchanges with people? I don't know, there should be something like a point of meeting, talking, giving information, be present.
I think the European Union has gone a long way into developing, elaborating, and improving its communication channels and dissemination flows. And I'm saying that in comparison to what was going on 15 years ago, I think there are many, many more opportunities. Now, what we're doing now, for example, right? It could just be a program where you would discuss educational policy, very important per se, and this is the topic of the next presentations, and skip all the European part, which is not. And I think this is very important. I think our civic education is flawed. And we don't have that, not only because the European Union is not investing on that. The European Union is making a lot of efforts, and a lot of funds are channeled to such activities. I think that the problem begins from member states and from the governments, because educational policies, after all, remain at the core of member states' jurisdiction, of the member states' power, authorities. So the European Union cannot intervene and say, look, you should have a kind of civic education improvement system or module at schools. No, this is member states' governments that are responsible for that. So I can see and I can hear your concerns. A lot of things have improved in the past. There are still several gaps and black holes, but it also needs a little bit of our own mobilization. The biggest problem, and I say that because I'm involved in such projects, is that we are usually preaching to the converted. There is an open call, an event, a seminar, whatever. Who is going to attend? The few people that are actually interested in what the European Union is doing. The problem is going to the less privileged, going to regions that are suffering economically, go to regions with very low participation rates in elections, not only European elections, but also national elections, because these are the areas where there is most need to familiarize citizens and engage and mobilize them. And I think this is a big challenge.
Yes, thank you.
So negative things, come on, what is bad? Trilogues, self-interest of states, uneven economy, different growth levels, right? No Leviathan. I would like to, I don't know who put that, but I would like to some elaboration on that. It's not a Leviathan, you mean, or it is a Leviathan?
No, that was me. And it is and what I mean though is the idea of the nation state has come about because of its control of violence over the population, and because of the socialization of national identity. And this is the one thing that the European Union does to the they do not use violence in order to create their identity, and this is a large contrast to how states have previously been done. And therefore, I mean by this, that is a little bit of what I mean by the comment.
All right, okay. I fully agree with the administrative burden and the trialogues. The system is very, very, very complicated. I told you so, but there is a reason why it is complicated. Because just imagine for a moment, it's you and your friends, you are trying to decide where to go this evening. You are planning to go out, all 27 of you, and you are trying to decide where to go. Some people would like pizza, some others would like to go for some vegetarian, some want to go for a drink, some want to go dancing. So how can you actually bring all this together without having a very, and all that, imagine a lot of decisions on that are going to be taken by unanimity. So we should all agree on this critical key decisions. Are we going to move ahead? Yes, all 27 need to agree on that. Otherwise, we cannot really engage in a treaty reform process. No new treaties. And let me get back to the reflection point, the first reflection point. From 1951 or 1957, where we have the Treaty of Rome, the first treaty, all the way to Maastricht, we had only one treaty reform, only one. And then from Maastricht to the Lisbon Treaty, the one that is now in function, it's less than 20 years, from 1993 to 2007, actually it's 15 years basically. We had more than four, we had 4 changes, 5 including the one that was never ratified. So what's going on? Why such a rush? Because, and I think we're running out of time and I have to give the answer, at least the answer I have in mind, unless there is something, cultural disparities. I don't know if that's the answer to the question, but it's definitely worth discussing. It's exactly because when the bipolar world, the Cold War ended, the whole peace process, the peace project nature of the European Union was somehow in a crisis. We had the reunification of Germany, and we had also a lot of countries from Central and Eastern Europe knocking on the door of the European Union. We want to join. How are we going to accommodate all these numbers? So we were looking for a way to reform this project in such a way as to meet the new challenges, the new concerns. And it was not easy. And it is still not easy because we still haven't found what we are looking for. Paraphrase a very popular song, right? We have actually come to a kind of balance, delicate balance, but it can easily be destabilized. The Treaty of Lisbon is not the end of the European Union. As I said, it's a constantly evolving process. It's a dynamic process. It will keep evolving no matter what. I'm not saying improving. It may very well disappear, dissolve, okay? Never know. I mean, until we had the Brexit, we thought it was inconceivable having one country leaving. Well, wait, look, the UK left. Maybe another country decides to leave. So that's what I'm saying. It's a constantly evolving process, and it's a very dynamic process. It's a very complicated process, and that explains a lot of the bureaucratic and institutional and complex decision-making arrangement, because we need to accommodate all these sensitivities, interests, preferences, governments, the people, elites, lobbies. All these are members of the broad thing that we call the European demos, the European political community. All these are very interesting, and I think I will stop sharing here. Thank you for your input to these slides. I hope you have understood as many things as possible, and I hope you have enjoyed the discussion. I'm open to discussion no matter how long it will take, but I'm sure that the other experts would also like to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Piers, for this really interesting presentation and really interactive one. Thank you very much. If you like to send by chat your contact or something, if people want to get in contact with you or have more questions.
I will right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are you going to share the slides with the group?
Yeah, we can share it.
At the last slide, there are the contact details. I'm writing them also here, just to have. Okay, but you can find the contact details also in the presentation.
Perfect.
Great. There you are.
Thank you very much. So for the second unit, I will give the floor to Mr. Hansdell about the subject, what those educational policies stand for.
Okay.
Yeah, hello.
You can hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
You can share or share the screen for me, or?
Yeah. I will share the screen for you,
okay,
as you prefer. You prefer to share you?
Yeah,
I share.
I have sent it to you, and then you can upload it, and I say, okay, you can take the next slide, etc. Okay. Oh, well, yeah, my name is Hans Dale. I'm here in the Netherlands. It's sunny here. You can see maybe like in a lot of other countries, and so it's a sunny day, and let's hope it will be a sunny presentation about education and policy. First of all, you can have the next slide about myself. I'm also here, was you mentioned, Sonja, about that I'm a member of the IFBB as a LIDO. LIDO is a Dutch organization for lifelong learning, founded in 1999. To help people working in education, in vocational education, to in higher education, and also in general education, to think about what does it mean, lifelong learning, how to can help them organizing conferences, seminars, workshops, even 3 days seminars and conference, international. So that's our role. But in 2013, we were 13 countries. We had an idea that looking at higher education, And also in vocational education and training, we need more attention for what's happening at level 5. And by level 5, we mean the level 5 of the European qualifications framework. In higher education, it's short cycle higher education. We call it the Netherlands associate. And then you have bachelor, master, etc. But there's also happening more and more in vocational education and training. And then they call it higher vocational education and training. And 2013, we said, okay, we need maybe also such a community for level 5 in Europe, like we have done in the Netherlands, to have a community of practice for this kind of qualification to help every country who is willing, operating with level 5, or have some plans for level 5, or want to cooperate between two sectors to have this community of practice. At the moment we have 580 members and 37 countries, so it's really successful. So I'm trying to take the lead for Chain 5 also to help all those experts and people working for level 5 qualifications in institutions, organizations, network, to help them. We also partner in FED4U too. Julia, the third presentation, will be telling more about it, I think, because FED4U too, she is sharing it, also part of the board. FED4U too is a European network consisting of 6 associations. There are 4 of them. That's why the FED4, responsible for vocational education and training, like the FBB, and 2 of them are involved in higher education, but they are willing to help those associations in vocational education and training to think about what I told about level 5. It's about progression, it's about lifelong learning, how to deal with different institutions, and how to deal with instruments. And I told you, as LIDOR, we are a member of FBB. That's why I'm here to help you with this presentation. Yeah, learning outcomes. By the end of this workshop, you are the learners now. I'm the teacher. Yeah, it's understand and get familiarized with the educational policy, more or less. If you want to talk about that education policy in Europe, in countries, what is happening at the national level, regional level, or local level. Yeah, you can talk for hours, etc., because there's a lot of things going on. But I give you some more information, some ideas to help you to think about what is necessary for me, what can be helpful for me. Why is it important to think as a staff member or a manager or a practitioner or working in a network, regional or locally, etc., to learn more about the education policy and the European initiatives. Some of them we will mention about the digital education plan, the European skills agenda, and lifelong learning. Yeah, there are some keynotes, etc. But a lot of things are not mentioned here already because you know about micro-credentials. There's also a lot of discussions about micro-credentials. There are recommendations about that. This morning also, again, about individual learning accounts, if you talk about lifelong learning. Also, absolutely important. I talk about education and training is in general, it's vocational education and training, but also at the higher levels, higher vocational education and training. Then it's about youth, it's our youngsters, the young people who, in this moment, what was happening now in the economy, in society, in the world. I don't know what's happening in your country, but in the Netherlands, we are really caring about what is the future for our youth, what is happening now in the labor market, what are the possibilities to find a job. Yes, there are a lot of jobs, but maybe in 2 years, and also with other issues. And it's about digital education and also with decoration. I will come back to that. Maybe Spiro said that already. He said 90% of everything what is happening in the European Union, 90% is regulated or made in laws or regulations, or they have some ideas or frameworks that for a lot of issues, a lot of fields that you are working with, like humanity and etc. But he mentioned also that education is not part of it. So it's more or less a disclaimer that if we're talking about education policy, if we're talking about European initiatives, that education is a national issue. Every country can decide about a policy they are using for the educational system. There's no penalty if you are not using the same instruments or the same frameworks. I mentioned already European qualifications framework. It's a framework. And then you can have a national qualifications framework. You can link to it, but nobody is saying, oh, what is happening here if you don't do it. Some countries are saying, okay, you want to have a different framework, a little bit different from that, not 8 levels or 7 or 10. There's no penalty. They are not saying you have to do this and that and that. Besides that, Europe, like the European higher education area, it's about the Bologna process. There are 49 countries involved, and Europe is 27, 28, and the Brexit. So 49 countries are involved in the European higher education area. How to talk about Europe and how to look at that process, etc. So you can help, you can discuss, you can have network over this kind of initiatives. But keep in mind, and that we come back to that at the end, that it's all about a national issue. It's about national policy. It's about a national framework for your system, how to use it. Nobody can tell from Brussels what to do. Okay, next slide. So this is what will come on the table of the table of contents. What I'm trying to inform you about it. What does educational policy mean? Then it does in general, more in general. And if you have questions, ask them to the chat or raise your hand. And second is educational policy. So there are a lot of initiatives of the European Union. I'm warning you, there's 5 mentioned here, but every day, every week, every month, every semester, once the new presidency of the European Council, there will be new initiatives. Everybody, every country, every organization wants to put a stamp on what is happening in the European Union. And then the third is the education and training policy. It's important to think about all that, but second, the agenda and plans, because if it's about money, there's a lot of money for education in Brussels, Erasmus Plus, Horizon, Center of Excellence, etc. So it's really interesting to look at what is being discussed in Brussels, because if you want to have a project, international project, then you keep in mind what they have the priorities. So if the priorities mentioned in the skills agenda, they also mention in new calls if it's about Erasmus Plus. So there's a link between those two. So they're having some regulations, they have some ideas, they have some plans, they have the money. But if you say, I don't like what they are mentioning in Brussels, don't do it. But maybe you want to be part of a project, there's no money from the budget. So that's also a tension between what Brussels is doing, is saying, is willing, the priorities, and what is happening in a country. Okay, the next slide. So first of all, what does educational policy mean? And then I will start with what I said, it's government. First of all, the policy is an instrument that you have as a government, as the ministry. A ministry can be organized in different ways. In the Netherlands, it's combined with education, culture, and science. And in other countries, it's combined with youth. It's about the labor market. So in some countries, education is more important. Okay, if you want to have a job, you need to be educated. So you need some schooling, and you need some training, etc. In other parts of Europe and other countries say, okay, it's important to have initial learning, and mentioned what here said has to be distributed in society. Validation. So why do you have an educational system? It's always having in mind that when you have completed education, you had a diploma or a certificate, etc. It's absolutely necessary to thinking about what is the value of that for yourself, but also for the economy and the labor market and the society, and also other part of non-formal learning and informal learning. And what the European Union is telling us is that looking at education is a human right. Everybody has the right to go to school, if it's possible. You need a policy for that. It's a human right to be educated. And the second one is that if you have such a system, then you need some regulations, you need some laws, you need some framework for acting as an institution or an organization or a partner. If you're like in dual education, then businesses, companies are involved. So you need a system for all those laws and regulations. But that's always difficult. You have to find a balance. Education is not that it has to be this or that exactly does this. And the government is telling you, well, you have to learn. Or the business world has to say, okay, we want this and then that as competencies and learning outcomes. So you need, as a government, to take care of some regulations, law and rule and frameworks, but give the possibilities to the institutions, to the teachers, to the practitioners, to partners in education, to have the freedom, to have the possibility to have their own program, to use the program as a link with the labor market, as a link with society. So if I'm talking about the Netherlands, there's always, maybe in every country, they are always complaining about regulations and rules. They all are fairly too tight. But it's all about control. The government is giving the money, has some budget for that, and they say, okay, it's public money. So we have to control you. It's about accreditation, it's about quality, it's about the inspectors who are looking what is happening. Is there nothing going wrong? So education policy, like I mentioned, is for the first, after all, it's the first, what do you say, first of all, it's part of a national strategy. The second slide. Oh, the next slide, etc. And then, yeah, you have a lot of forms. You have, and every form in education system has its own purpose, an own strategy and an own ideas and what are happening, etc. So, as mentioned here, it's early childhood education. It's about the kindergarten and primary and secondary education, provide university colleges, etc. And also adult education. And that's formal. And by I mean by formal that it's more or less controlled by the ministry, by the government, and they are funding it or something. And you have that system like the laws and accreditation and quality control, etc. And besides that, of course, and that's about lifelong learning also, is job training. It can be also possible to have in-company training to get, like I said, micro credentials. It's about individual learning accounts, discussions that we will go on in the next years, but non-formal education, and there are also schemes necessary for that. Maybe also in other countries, a lot of people are worrying about also today and in the last years about the focus having on to have the most higher levels to young people to go to university, to have a degree, etc. So vocational education and training, they're promoting it now in a lot of countries. They have a lot of value. They are very important for the labor market, but still in this time frame, a lot of people, parents, counselors, teachers are thinking we need our young children to have at the most higher level, etc. And then they are thinking about universities. Maybe it can be in professional higher education. It can be in vocational education and training at a higher level, 5, 6, and 7. That's we as Chain 5 are fighting for, to have a more balance in what is higher education and not only universities. And it can be also colleges, vocational education and training colleges. Every country, I said, has a national policy about that. The OECD and maybe you're aware of that. This looking at what is happening in countries, not every year for every country, but sometimes they pick some countries and they said, okay, we do some research, we're visiting the countries, talking with experts, people in the ministry, from education, from institutions, organizations, etc. And then they have an idea from an outsider's view, and they said, okay, looking at your system, maybe you can do this and then that. Maybe you can act in another way. Maybe you can have another idea about how the provision of education, or maybe you have to change a little bit the system. You can have a suggestion about what's happening in other countries. So if you're looking at the OECD, what they are producing as report is really important. The link is mentioned over here. Next slide. And then, yeah, the European, I'm missing etc. European policies, etc. and training. Yeah, the European skills agenda. Okay, thank you. Some of these agendas, I mentioned already that if you're looking at what is published, what they are publishing at the European level, what the European Commission is publishing, what the European Parliament is coming on, what they are having some ideas. There are a lot of documents, and it is really interesting, but really difficult to have to read them, to get an opinion about it, and to think, okay, how can I use it? How can I use such an idea, such an agenda, such a document, such etc. For me, what's in for me? What's in for me as an institution? What's in for me as an expert, as a manager or a coordinator, etc. So some of them are mentioned here. First of all, it's the European skills agenda. It's skills, it's about competences, it's about learning outcomes, it's by knowledge. It's a 5-year plan, and that can help you as an individual. If you're working in education, or maybe even a learner, or you're responsible for the strategy or your institution. It can also for the businesses, it can be in the labor market, then the world of work. They get an idea. I said, okay, we want to have people who are graduating from schools, from a college or a university or a business academy. What's happening over there? Are they educated in the way we think that's important? Because it's the world of work. And they said, okay, we want to have graduates, we have people to be more educated, and it has to be important for us. So they can look at what is happening at the European level, what the European Commission thinking about is interesting at the European level, in an international context, what they have to learn and what is important. So it's 3 points. It's about strengthening being competitive. It's set out in the European Green Deal. If you have competition, if you have education, if you have a lot of programs, etc., part of that has to be at the moment looking at what does it mean for the environment, for the climate, what does it mean for our world. So part of that is that you have to look at what we have to educate our students, our youngsters, also adults in lifelong learning. What does it mean if you're learning, having a job, and then get a job working, etc.? What does it mean for the European Green Deal? How is contributing to our climate, etc.? Social fairness, etc. And the education. And the education, it has to be open for everyone. It has to be for everyone to want to go to school, to have the possibility to do it. So the European Pillar of Social Rights, it's about access to education and training and lifelong learning for everybody, everywhere in the European Union. And that's sometimes really difficult. When the European Pillar of Social Rights was published a few years ago, there was a lot of discussion about it. Everybody agreed about it and said, okay, yes, what is saying here, what we have agreed upon, and education and training. But nowadays it's more and more and more difficult. Also with the situation now in Europe, what is happening, how to be focusing on education and people are going abroad. We have youngsters coming from other countries. We have refugees. We have migrants. You have international students. So it's looking at if the national strategy, if you're looking at what's going on in your own system, how to be open for everyone, it's a right, but how to finance it, how to shape it, etc. It's always in discussion at the national level and also regional level. And as mentioned, and then it's linked to the resilience of the reactive crisis based on the lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. The discussion about that will be take another year or 2 years, etc. What is happening now if we're looking at the lesson that we have learned and etc. Difficult to find out. The digital education plan, yes, thank you. You can find the information on the internet, but a few keywords from that. It's a digital. We have learned also from the COVID. It's about online learning. It's about remote education. It's about not going to school, but you can go in working groups and you can using like this, Zoom or MS Teams. Will it change the education system? Will it change the way we are educating young people? There's a discussion also here in the Netherlands. Some of the vocational education and training institutions said it's absolutely marvelous. It gives it more freedom, more time for other things. But another institute they say no. We are looking at the social aspect of learning, of education. So we want to have them at the campus. We want them in groups. So it will be going on. And now nobody knows what's happening in next year. But so we learned a lot about digital education. But there's an action plan that it's about the long-term strategic vision, high quality, inclusive and digital education. And the challenges and opportunities of the pandemic. And of course, the European said, can we learn from each other? So can we have a stronger cooperation? It's about the European Union level of digital education. And then it's about teaching how to use technical technologies or digital technologies for teaching. There are a lot of very, very interesting issues, but it's a plan. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of plans, but still about the national governments. It's about the national partners. It's about the national organizations. And like EVBB also is an international association. So think about that. What does it mean? You can have some plans, you can have some ideas, but then to the grassroots level, how to use those ideas. The next slide. About common values, inclusive education and the European dimension of teaching. It's about the role of education and culture in strengthening European identity. So it's about citizenship and common values. So what do we have as European Union in what are the common values? What do you have? And another question is, can we share it? It was also said in the first presentation, if you're looking at the members of the European Union, they are completely different. If you look at the values they have, the way they are using education for these common values, it's completely different in some countries. So it's having them together, talk about common values, inclusive education, is difficult. So, it's absolutely necessary to do it as vocational education and training. And the second remark is that it's about intolerance, polarization, and nationalism. But again, big words, but difficult to find solutions. There's no framework for that. It's not a matter of saying, okay, this can happen and this has to be done, and then there's no intolerance or there's no nationalism. It's a challenge of strengthening the common values in a high priority. So let's hope that after the pandemic, maybe after this, you can call it a war, as an invasion, etc. We can start talking again about this again. Next slide. Yeah, our work as a network, it's lifelong learning. That's a European framework. There are 8 key competencies. You can see them on the screen, and you know they are mentioned in the documents, etc. I pick one of them is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is absolutely very interesting for a lot of institutions. It's not only by entrepreneurship, it's also intrapreneurship. If you're an employee or you're a worker, then you're also part of a team. You're working in a company, and then you're also an entrepreneur. And that's what we need. We need in this time frame, in this what's happening in the economy, internationalization, international trades, etc. It's about companies who are really flexible. Old-fashioned, not old now. You can be an entrepreneur. Of course, you can be self-employed. You can be flexible and self-employed. You have your own business, etc. More of them, there are more and more of them, but only if companies or small and medium-sized enterprises, we need people who are entrepreneur and then in that way intrapreneur. They are able to work in a team, and that's really important for education. So if we are having teaching programs also in vocational education and training and higher education, has to be part of that. It's part of being a team. So it's more broader, and then you can be specializing, etc. But it's always about entrepreneurial thinking, being creative, being innovative. So one of those recommendations, all those 8 are, as here, a reference tool for education and training stakeholders for the future. This can be these 8, you can have 8 conferences about that. And talking about, I said, what does it mean? It's just a word, it's just a term, it's just some idea. But what's behind it? Next slide. So key competencies for the lifelong learning framework. It's a European framework, lifelong learning. The key issue here is that a lot of people are thinking that lifelong learning starts when you are 23 or 24, 25. But lifelong learning, lifelong developing, lifelong developing yourself as a citizen, as an employer, as an employee, someone, a worker, etc. Lifelong learning starts already when you're young, even more. 20 years ago, okay, go to school, complete your program, and then you'll find a job. But nowadays, you have to think about already what's the basis for lifelong learning in education when you're 14 or 15 or 16 years old. And I mentioned already, nowadays is more the rat race, we call it here, to go to a high level, to go to university. And then we have to improve for lifelong learning other learning pathways. And we are talking here about vocational education and training. It's really important to find out how we can improve the status, etc. You know, we or not, Fed4U2, I mentioned in the beginning, had the idea to have every year a European Vocational Skills Week. And the keyword was make it better, or vocational training at the first place, or etc. But in every country, it's necessary to have a focus more on vocational education and professional education. That's really for young people. to think about lifelong learning, that if you're having vocational education and training, it's always possible when you're 25 years old or 30 years old, you can find another way to more schooling or go back to school or in part-time or in dual education. So lifelong learning starts in the beginning. It's absolutely necessary. So then in a way, all learners achieve their full potential. Next slide. And then about youth strategy. It's a little bit old, 2018, but are still actual opportunities to find a job in the job market and the labor market. That's one, etc. Young people actually participate in society. And there was now there's an update. The European Union Youth Strategy has a plan tackling existing upcoming challenge for young people are facing over Europe. Like I already mentioned, it is still difficult in this time frame what we are facing now to think about what does it mean for young people. So it's even more and more important to have partnerships, international partnership for young people, to give them the possibility to maybe to find a job in another country, or to participate in society in another country, or studying here and go back, or maybe we can find a job. So it's absolutely an interesting strategy that you need as a country, as a national government, but this is exactly why we have the European Union. So your strategy. Next slide. Yes, the Osnabrück Declaration. This is an example of what we had as influence at FED4U2. I told you about vocational education and training and higher education. They have the network, a platform, a community, and FED4U2. And it was for the first time that FED4U2, those associations, were really involved in discussions about the future of vocational education and training. So that is why it's really important to mention this Osnabrück Declaration. It shows that European Association for Vocational Education and Training and its members, and the members are institutions, are experts, are practitioners, are national networks, etc. It gives the possibility from the bottom up, not telling in Brussels what they have in mind and the ministers and all the presidents and etc. But also you, if you're working at the grassroots level, but if you're a member of such an organization, of such vocational education and training network, it's possible to have some ideas, put them on the table. There are national, regional conferences. There are annual conferences internationally of the organization. And then they can pick it up. And they said, okay, this is happening there. This is what we need. So if you're looking for a declaration, a document that is really interesting for the next 5 years, it's mentioned to be 2025, and it's supported by those organizations and associations, read it. It's about promoting the exchange of best practices and peer learning activities. It's about support. But there is always a but, you know. This was signed by the ministers. All the ministers involved in vocational education and training signed in November 2020. They signed this declaration. And then you're asking, who's taking the further initiatives for that? I said always, who's pushing the red button, okay, to start the process. And then it's the same group as they are the ministers. So if you want to have the follow-up, then you need another conference for the minister to talk about vocational education and training. And it's really difficult. Spain has the presidency next semester in 2023. They have vocational education and training on the agenda. Let's hope that Spain is having a conference with all the ministers for vocational education and training about this 2020, what is happening now, 2022 and 2023. What have we agreed about vocational education in the future, in the next 5 years, and now, etc. So I will mention that the declaration is was results of what we had as network for vocational education and training, but now it has to be followed up. Again, education is a national issue. So if you're from 7, 8, 9 countries, go to your ministry, go to your minister, ask them if there will be a conference about this, push him or her to go over there and talk about what is happening in your country. And maybe you get some help from other countries also, networking. So that's why we are emphasizing this Osnabrück Declaration. It's an important step of having some influence from bottom up on what is happening in Brussels. They said, okay, this is the opinion of vocational education and training providers. And now, come on, next slide. The education and training policy. I've spoken about the pillar of social rights. You see a lot of good, ambitious aims to bring back the social dimension of the European Union. Reconnect European citizens with the same addressing key issues. It's a good start. It's absolutely good to have such an overview. But also here, I don't know whether in every country this is still high on the agenda. Of course, social right, but I mean in a way to have such an overview and said, okay, it's not possible to do everything, not to aim for all of these rights, etc. But what does it mean for vocational education and training? The second slide is it's the same for the sustainable development, the sustainable goals, development goals. When it was published, we noticed that they said, wow, what an event to have such an overview of 17 of these goals. It was adopted right away by a lot of countries, by a lot of organizations, etc. It's about the sustainable future, etc. It's ambitious, absolutely, but it's a perfect framework that said, okay, if I have an organization, association, or a network or a platform, looking at my aims, what I'm aiming for, what we are fighting for as a platform, pick some of these and said, okay, this, we can be important in this, we can play a role, we can promote this. Even if an institution, it's not necessary, not possible to have 17 goals and to have a strategy. Pick your ideas, pick what you're able to do, what you are strong enough, etc. You can help them. Maybe you can divide yours as an institution and our institution, and some of the institutions we can cooperate. But it is embraced by a lot of associations, the sustainable goals, by also UNESCO and UNIFOC. The next slide. One of them, quality of education. Of course, this is important to look at the quality of education goals, aim at assuring inclusive and credible quality education and lifelong learning opportunities. This is one of them you can take on board if you want to discuss inclusive quality education, promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And I said also, here mentioned that some girls and boys complete free primary and secondary education schooling by 2030. Of course, no doubt about that we have to aim at that. But back to lifelong learning, also mentioned here, lifelong learning starts more and more for all those young girls and boys. If you're not having opportunities when you're 12, 13, 14, 17 years old, nowadays it's more and more difficult to find another learning pathway to have other opportunities. So this is really important to also, if you are working in vocational education and training, and 17, 18 years, 19 years old, cooperate with institutions in primary and secondary education about making those learning pathways to make it more equal. I mentioned already that we can fight for vocational education and training at higher levels. Next slide. We have the European Trade Union Committee for Education to fight for the role of teachers. Absolutely necessary, because like in the Netherlands, no good education, no quality of education if there are no good teachers, enough teachers and research and educational staff. It starts with them. It starts with teachers, research and professional and in higher education, professors, etc. So I'll pick some of them. An investment into education should be maintained even in time of financial economic crisis. Yes, it's good to say, but we are cutting some budget, maybe cutting the budget for institutions, maybe for students, for vet students, etc., less grants, etc. It's difficult nowadays to have inflation. The prices are going up, finding no houses, etc. How to support that investment, etc. And then professional status for teachers and other education employees should be high. Yes, of course. Teacher has to be a good status. We need teachers, but it's difficult. It's difficult to attract a lot of enough people, young people, to become a teacher. It's good to have such a trade union committee for education to defend all those ideas here, the core values, etc. And of course, there are trade unions, but that's another issue. But working together as a team of an institution, in a region, when you're teaching the same programs, etc., work together, learn from each other. Next slide. It's an old one, just mentioning because we are SVET4U too. We started in 2015. This was the first success. So for the first time, you can imagine that, but before 2010, the VET providers were not involved in the policy in vocational education and training. Only on board were the unions and the employers organization. Until 2010, the VET providers, the VET associations didn't have a seat in Brussels to talk about how to deal with vocational education and training. So this was the first success that we had, and the Ruger conclusion. For the first time we were co-organizers, etc. And then I already mentioned that in 2020 we had the Osnabrück Declaration. So read it, what it's saying here. Think about it was the success for the VET provider. And again, it shows that if you're working in an institution or just being an expert in the regional level, you can have some influence. Also nationally. Next slide. Okay, some takeaways. Yeah, I'm talking too long. Education policies and instruments governments have to implement so that knowledge is produced. I mentioned it already. It's both sides. It's learning, validation, to give the partners a role, employees organizations, etc. It's important to bear in mind access is a human right. We have to think about the climate neutral Europe and digital transformation. These two issues has to be used by developing new programs to actualize, to have new ideas, to modernize, to have more maybe electives or minors or other programs, etc. Use it. Take part in society and lead everyday lives. Europe can only grasp this opportunity if people develop the right skills. And last but not least, key competencies, knowledge, skills and attitudes needed by all personal fulfillment and development. We have these key competencies, and then we need high quality education, training, and lifelong learning for all. It means that a national issue, a national system, a national approach, a national part of dealing with education at all levels, it has to be flexible. I always saying what I learned from the minister in Switzerland, we are proud to have our system like this, what's mentioned here. There are no dead ends. You can compete, you can have institutions in vocational and higher education, but don't try to have those dead ends. Give opportunities to young people, the elderly people, and also the adult learners. Thank you. Maybe you have some questions. So it's a long story, but I said already, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of things happening in the European Union, but you can help.
Thank you very much. And I think Dolores wants to maybe have a question. Please, Dolores.
Yeah. Hello, Hans. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
After a long time.
Yeah, maybe we can meet physically, but it's online now.
Exactly.
Familiar faces.
That's right. Hans, thank you so much for this, I would say, comprehensive picture, and also for, I would say, food for thoughts. You know that I think you touch a little bit our fiber to sensitize adult education.
Yeah.
And if I got your comment right, and please confirm it, you said that there is not like a guideline or European framework of common values in learning environments. Is this correct? Mm-hmm. Because I thought, I mean, we are here, several organizations, and here maybe I call the attention to Sonia to say, why not as the EBBB, we could do a research project in both the people that are participating today, and if they have interest, to submit a proposal and we go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be an interesting cross-cultural research here, and we can take this idea. Probably some of you will be in Brussels, so we can discuss a little bit further if somebody would like to go with it. I will, definitely, and I hope that Theodore will support us in writing the application.
Yeah, it could be a subject of the discussion during the roundtable in face-to-face camp in Brussels. That would be great. You will be there on the 12th, if I remember well, Dolores.
Yes, I will be there.
We could, so we can discuss with all the participants over there then.
Yeah, you're right about doing research and looking at the environment, etc. So. But we have a lot of ideas about that as Chain 5, but that's another story. We can learn from other. We're talking about the European Union. When I'm in touch with someone in Canada, also United States, they have done already research about this, etc. So we can learn from them. Mm-hmm. So we invite them also for this kind of research. But okay.
Mm-hmm. Also, Hans, at the moment, I'm quite looking at Africa as well. So this maybe could be also an interesting research, Europe versus Africa perception of values in learning environments.
Yeah.
Could be another idea to it.
Yeah. I've been maybe also been in Africa, Rwanda, Burkina Faso, etc. I visited some of those institutions, but you're right. They have some very innovative and creative ideas about that.
So let's think about it in Brussels.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we have other questions?
I have a question. My question is about digitalization. I'm not sure. I mean, just because something that I don't know. Does it exist a European platform? Things like, I don't know, Coursera or EDX, where you could find courses from several European universities, for
Yeah.
example? Does it exist, something like that? No, I don't believe it does.
Sorry, do I mean
No,
that?
does it exist, such a common platform? Because, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
well, I mean, I haven't heard of it. So this is what I'm asking. Does it exist?
A platform for this?
Yes.
No, I'm not. Maybe there's someone else. I can find out, etc. You need for this. That is already a platform based on this digital plans, etc. You mean?
Yes, because I mean that would obviously mean
Yeah,
be
yeah.
something very interesting to build. Because I
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
we are sort of, as you were saying, looking at the United States.
Yeah,
I mean
yeah,
we are
yeah.
using their resources, but it
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
very interesting, you know, to build.
Yeah, there has been
One of-
a working group for that under CEDEFOP about this, etc. But then they decided to stop it in 2020. So, but I can ask again. Maybe they will start a platform. But no, I'm not so good in those details. But maybe someone else. But there was a platform. There has been a platform 2016 to 2019. There's also a report. It was under the umbrella of CEDEFOP.
Okay.
But
So, but
I can find out. I hope to find out. There's maybe the follow-up.
okay, thank you, because that is something that could be
Yeah.
implemented. I mean, what I found really interesting in your talk is is a sensation that I often have
Yeah. Okay.
in this discussion, that European legislation or European policies, I mean, they sort of, there is an affirmation of principles, of
Yeah.
good principle, but then the practical implementation is lacking.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think, you know, it would be interesting to try, you know, to work in that direction.
Yeah. I completely agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Margherita. I think Claudia wants to maybe had a question.
No, Sonia, sorry.
Okay.
I was, no, it's okay. On an aspect, I'm not sure if it might partially, or in a sense, be considered the digital skills and job platform for what was the last question, as an attempt in somehow on the topic. And on the recent calls, there is more evident the focus on, with reason, I mean the one that are open now, on looking for tech companies in Europe to let them scale up what they are doing. And this is back up to, of course, us looking at the US, where the funding is constant there to support tech companies to do huge platforms, because I mean that's as Coursera is a huge platform, it's not, you know, just a small one. And so yeah,
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia and Hans. Do we have other question for Mr. Dale?
I can put my email address in the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Your contact.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation of the Unit 2. We will have our last presentation on Unit 3 with Mrs. Julia Meschino. But before, let's do a quick break of 10 maybe Theodore, you want to? I will give maybe the floor to Theodore.
I just wanted to jump in because I had again, well, the last month is not the best for me. I had certain delays, so I was stuck in München at the airport. But finally, I made it back to the office just now. So I just wanted to jump in and say hello and also thank to everybody for being here, and also for the presentations that I will for sure, since it's recorded, listen afterwards. So thank you very much for being here. I hope that you will be also triggered to register for Brussels. Don't hesitate. We are able to fund one person per organization. So whoever is going to attend, most probably the expenses are going to be covered. One last thing, Sonia, I don't know how the program is running until now because I wasn't online. If you want to continue and speed up the process so that we finish a little bit earlier, for me it is fine, but it has to be something we will discuss all together.
Yes, I agree.
And also ask Julia because she's going to do the presentation.
Julia just arrived to you. Welcome to Julia. Hello. Depending on the participant, but I think it's a good idea, Teodoro. Maybe we can start directly with Julia and maybe finish earlier. What do you think?
Fine for me.
And for the others, no. Okay, perfect. Everyone is doing like that. Okay, good. So I will give you the floor to Giulia Meschino for the unit and last presentation of the day on the history and evolution of educational policy in the EU. Please.
Julia, you were lucky leaving earlier yesterday, yeah?
I
you
don't know if I was lucky. I was lucky because yeah.
We were together at the European Training Foundation yesterday with Julia, and she left 2 hours earlier because of the problems with the flights, and because of that she was able to sleep at home tonight, but yesterday, but I couldn't. So lucky.
Yeah, but I was very lucky because my train was delayed. Otherwise, I would have missed the coincidence in Paris. But anyway, it was another journey. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much,
Julia.
Sonia. You're welcome, Theodore. Sonia, just one thing, if you can share my presentation on the screen because I have some problems at the moment. So I can't do it.
Wait a second.
Yeah, in the meantime, I will introduce myself a little bit. So good afternoon to everyone. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon, and I want to thank my colleagues from EVBB for inviting me to participate as a speaker in this session. I hope you will find the topic interesting. My name is Giulia Meschino, as Sonia has already mentioned, and I am the Director and Secretary General of the European Vocational Training Association, EVTA. EVTA is a network like EVBB, based at European level that represents vocational education and training providers. We were established in the 90s after a project of cooperation called Euro Qualification, and then the partners of that project decided to establish this permanent framework for cooperation. In the years, we have developed as one of the major interlocutors for the European Commission, and we started to strengthen our cooperation with the other networks working in the same field. By creating this permanent informal platform of cooperation called Vet4U2. I'm not going into the details of this because it could require half an hour more, and I am the last speaker of today's session, and I don't want you to be bored about it, but you will have opportunities to learn more if you want. Let's go directly into the topic of today. So the history and evolution of educational policy in the European Union. Sonia, you can go next. So learning outcomes for this session, understanding the creation, the establishment of educational policy in the European Union since its creation. The date to remind is 1957, which is the date of the Treaty of Rome. establishing the European Union and the Euratom. But we are going to see it soon, and we are going to see how this had an impact on the startup of educational policy. And also you will learn a little bit more about the educational programs that are that have been put in place by the European Commission to support activities in education and training. So keywords: educational policy, Lisbon strategy, Copenhagen process, ET 2020, European education area, and Erasmus+. Some of these topics will be also covered in the next webinars, I think, but I will be giving you an overview anyway. So you can go next. Yeah, this is the table of contents. Basically, my presentation will be divided into three main contents. One is the development of EU educational policies, how that was started, how the education became a topic of interest to be addressed with a more coordinated approach. Then we will go through main dates and initiatives that have been developed since the beginning of the European Union concerning education. And at the end, I will be giving you a little overview about all the programs, as I was saying before. So let's start with the first one. EU educational policy emerged essentially with the aim of carrying out the internal market obligations. You know, the European Union was founded in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome, as I was saying before. And at that time, the idea was to create an internal market with free movement of people, capital, goods, and money. But in order to be able to do so, those that decided to found the European Union felt the need to provide also cultural and social integration for achieving this aim of political and cultural integration. So that is when the EU educational policy emerged as an important topic for the European Union since the beginning. It was really considered as an instrument to fulfill the demands of equality and justice in society and to realize social justice in order to contribute to the economic growth. You know that in Europe we have different cultures, different histories, different political identities, but and this reflects also in the differences in the education system. In spite of these differences, while education is seen as an advantage for countries to put their own experience forward, knowledge appears as an advantage in terms of the development of new viewpoints by experiences and innovations are exchanged. Unfortunately, and this is pretty known, we don't have a European policy, unified policy for education and training. Education and training are still topics of competencies of each member state. And this has an impact on how education and training are managed, because there are plenty of initiatives at the European level in order to promote education and training, and also in order to align some of the subjects related to education and training and make life of people easier. Especially, I'm referring especially to those people that wants to move from one country to another one for job purposes and so on. But still, there are still some challenges that we need to face in order to be effective in our education and training programs. Sonia, you're going a little bit too fast.
I'm very sorry. There was something happening, I think, with the PowerPoint presentation. Where are you on the slide? Here? Before?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah, no, this one.
Okay.
The first content was to pass the message that education as a policy was already on the table since the beginning of the European Union, but already since the beginning, the main challenge was aligning education systems. And this is something that we are still experiencing because we still don't have a unified, coordinated policy at the European level for education. But we have a lot of initiatives in education and training. I'm going next. I want to give you some information concerning the evolution in during the history. And here on this slide, you have some data, some dates referring to some of the most important moments for the creation of the European Union and for the history of the last 70 years in general. And also you have on the right part of the slide some of the most important dates for the education policy. So let's go through them. So basically, in the 57, as I said before, Treaty of Rome established the CEE and the Euratom. So the common market was created based on the free movement of goods, people, services, and capital. This corresponded to a gradual alignment of the economic policies of the member states, where education came to play a role in state building and political unification. So since the very beginning of the European cooperation in the field of education, ministers of education have underlined the diversity of their system of education. However, the community foresaw the harmonization of the educational area, and the discussion was always very important. Several members of the community at that time, and one of the the first one was France. They kept on defending that education was something that had to stay as a national policy. So as a result of this need to have a bigger alignment at European level, but also to keep education as a competence of the member state, it was at the end accepted that the educational policy was going to be continued under the intergovernmental cooperation, which means that education was dealt still by member states, but with some sort of exchanges and discussions among the ministry. This was went on, like that. I mean, in the 60s, we don't have many relevant events about educational policies, but with the problems that arose in the 70s, and I'm referring to problems in the global context, like the oil crisis in the 73, the rise of unemployment, the economic stagnation, and so on. There was a need that was raised about the fact that education was maybe to be considered as a solution to these problems, to these challenges. That is why the Commission taken a decision on education and training in '74, and this was the first document that really established the foundation of a more coordinated vocational education system in Europe. By this decision, the Commission highlighted that education was a national system first, and then reached a consensus on establishing a committee consisting of representatives of the member states to harmonize the national systems of the member countries in the integration project. the process. The effects of this development led to the first education action plan that was published in 1976. The main, let's say, the main elements of this education action plan were the transition of young people from education to business life, the improvement of the educational possibilities for migrants and refugees, the development of language education, and the increased cooperation in the higher education sector. So this was already a very important step for educational policies in the European Union. In the 90s, the European Commission established also the Euridice. Sorry if I tell it in Italian, but probably in English would be Euridice. But Euridice is a network that was created for about education, and it's still, I mean, it's still alive and provides studies and information about educational systems and policies in Europe. And this network was created to put all this information at the service of those of the policymakers, and also to contribute to constitute a common policies base for the cooperation in the community. After the establishment of the Euridice and after the developments that we have seen during the 70s, another prominent milestone for educational policy was the Single European Act, not in itself, but for the consequences that this act had on education and training. Because the Single European Act that was published in 1986 stipulated the completion of a single European internal market. So it confirmed once again the willingness of free movements of goods, persons, capital, and services, and also the step forward with comparing to what was established by the Treaty of Rome was the fact that these free movements of goods, persons, capital, and services have been linked also to the development of human resources and skills of people. So this was quite an important moment for the educational policies, because it was highlighted the importance of developing skills and competencies for people in view of contributing to the growth, to the economic, to the socio-economic growth of the European community. In this way, education became a new priority for the community members. And after this development, the member states started to develop educational opportunities to establish the single market, and also started these initiatives referring to exchange of students and lecturers that were that culminated actually in the launch of the first Erasmus program in 1987. In 1987, there was the first person, I don't remember her name, it was a lady, she had the first Erasmus opportunity, but it was still in the framework of higher education. So I'm not talking about the Erasmus program as it is right now. I'm talking about the Erasmus program as it is in university. Sonia, no, go back a moment, because I still have another couple of things to say. After the, at the end of the 80s, you know, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. That was the period during which there were new countries coming into the European community. I'm referring to the countries from the Eastern from the Eastern Europe. So the European Union had to readapt a little bit its policies, and this was done during the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty led also to the reconsideration of some other policies in the framework of the European agenda. For example, at the end of the 90s, there was this Bologna process that was launched. Bologna process was still linked to the more to the higher education, but it had an impact on education policies in the European Union. The Bologna process, with the Bologna process, the countries began to share experiences, comparing their different systems in higher education, and also started to develop regional cooperation in order to address some similar problems that they were experiencing in their countries. The Bologna process also had an impact on what came after it, which means the Lisbon summit that was made in 2000. And now you can go on. So the Lisbon summit that was held, as I said, in 2000, brought to some conclusions, and it was basically a summit with ministers of education. They reflected on what is common to the Union, and also they reflected to the development of a common interest approach in education, trying to go a little bit beyond national diversity, and also trying to debate some common objectives in the educational system. The Lisbon summit led to the draft of the Lisbon strategy. That is also that has to be considered also as another important milestone for the EU education. The Lisbon strategy was aimed at bringing EU economy in a competitive, knowledge-based and living state in a sustainable capacity of growth. So basically, the idea was bringing Europe in a dynamic, competitive, knowledge-based economy by 2010. Additionally, it was highlighted that the common culture, it was highlighted the fact that with the newcomers in the European Union and with the enlargement process, the fact that the European Union had so many different members needed more cooperation also from a language and cultural point of view. So the main aim of this strategy, as I said, was bringing Europe in a dynamic, competitive and knowledge-based economy. And to do so, the Lisbon strategy highlights 5 basic areas. One based on quality, which means that all member countries should work for increasing the quality in every phase of education and vocational education systems. For quality here, they meant quality in general, quality of the learning processes, quality of teaching, both for young and for adult students, quality of equipment for helping the learning process of people, and quality of the teaching materials. Another important area was the one of the access. All member countries were encouraged to work for developing the access to learn and improving the lifelong learning for every phase of the individual life. There was an emphasis here on the role played by the member countries to develop the social harmony of education systems and being sensitive to the conditions of learners for carrying out a more responsible and attractive learning at the same time. Another important area was the one of contents. All member countries were encouraged to work for reviewing the basic skills of young people, especially those that were left a little bit aside or coming from disadvantaged environment, and trying to integrate them into vocational training, into communication, and also trying to include them in technology training. Most of the member countries underlined that the role of education was important to transfer some social values linked also to the belonging of the European community, like those values like democracy and citizenship. Another area of the Lisbon strategy addressed the openness. Most countries highlighted the need to have schools, education centers, university, and the need to open these institutions to the world in order to guarantee transparency for member countries, but also for countries outside the community. So there were already some first attempts to go a little bit more beyond the European borders. Last area of importance for the Lisbon strategy was efficiency. Despite the member countries mentioned about the increments of the expenditures for human resources, they also emphasized the need of making the quality assurance in education systems more useful and convenient on the efficiency of the policies introduced. So this area was meant to push member states to invest more in human resources and in educational programs. You can go to the next slide, Sonia. So with the Lisbon strategy, you see a first attempt to have a more coordinated approach on educational policies. Let's say that this was already felt since the beginning of the European community, but still very hard for the member states to accept, to run together in education policies. But slowly, step by step, also with the enlargement of the European community, the need of harmonizing educational policies became more, it was more evident. So after the Lisbon strategy, another important milestone for the educational policies in Europe was the Copenhagen process. The Copenhagen process was initiated in 2002. It's an integrated part of the Lisbon strategy. So let's say that the Copenhagen process puts the ideas of the Lisbon strategy more into operational, in an operational approach, and especially focused on vocational training, raising the idea that vocational training must be developed to play an active and a key role to develop lifelong learning policies, and also to address the supply of highly skilled workforce to make Europe one of the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy and societies in the world. So the development of a true European labor market relies on having a skilled, adaptable, and mobile workforce able to use its qualifications and competencies as a kind of common currency throughout Europe. This was the idea. In this respect, the main aims of the Copenhagen process are the development of lifelong learning and the promotion of mutual trust between the key players. We start to talk about lifelong learning, and we start to talk about cooperation, not only between countries, but also between different stakeholders that are involved in education and training. The Copenhagen process foresees some main objectives that are listed in the slide. As you can read yourself, the single framework for transparency and of qualifications and competencies. This is still a very important issue for education and training in this period. Cooperation in quality assurance in vocational training, credit transfer system for vocational training, strengthening policies, systems, and practices for lifelong learning guidance, support to the development of qualifications and competencies at the sectoral level, and focus to the learning needs of teachers and trainers. As you can see, since 2000, there were put on the table some important topics that are still today of high importance, that are still treated by the European Commission and also by all the stakeholders that are working in the field of education and training. Sonia, you can go next. Okay. So in this next slide, I'm going to give you also an overview of two other important documents and two other important events that had an impact on educational policies in Europe in the last years. In 2010, the European Commission published a report that is called Europe 2020, a European strategy for smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. This report that was actually published under the Commission, the Barroso Commission, foresaw some objectives, quite ambitious, in 5 different areas of employment, innovation, education, social inclusion, and climate energy. As you can see, it's maybe the first document where education and employment maybe was already mentioned in previous documents, but I think this is the first document where education was clearly mentioned as an area of intervention for the European Commission. Each member state can adopt its own national targets for these 5 areas, but there were also concrete actions that were made at European level in order to boost this strategy. And another important thing to be said about this Europe 2020 is that the report emphasized the initiatives in the field of education, vocational training, and lifelong learning, and linking them to the smart growth for the development of the European Union. The Europe 2020 strategy led also to the publishing of the Education and Training 2020. That was it was adopted a little bit earlier in 2009, but it was already there is a link between the 2 documents, because this ET 2020 is a document more focused on the education and training, and provides also some benchmarks, indicators to be reached by the European Union for 2020. Indeed, it defines the long-term strategic objectives that were actually making lifelong learning and mobility a reality, improving the quality and efficiency of education and training, promoting equity, social cohesion, and active citizenship, enhancing creativity and innovation, including entrepreneurship at all levels. So these were the main topics under the ET 2020. But let's go a little bit into the last 10 years, especially referring to vocational education and training, because there are 3 documents that I want to mention during this presentation. Probably you will have some more detailed presentations about them, but I still want to talk a bit, because these are documents that actually foresaw the involvement of our networks like EFTA, EBBB, and the others, also in the contribution to the drafting of this document. So I want to spend some few words on that. Sonia, are you? No, go next. Yeah, thank you very much. So the documents that I'm referring to are the Bruges Communiqué that was published during the Belgian presidency of the European Union. It was published in 2011. And the main idea of the Bruges Communiqué that is linked to the Copenhagen process, it's the one of increasing the European cooperation on vocational education and training. It was actually adopted at the end of 2010, so it was at the very beginning of 2011 that entered into force. It was adopted by the education ministers from 33 European countries, which means that it foresaw also some countries that are not part of the European Union, like the current North Macedonia, Liechtenstein, Iceland, Norway, and Turkey. And it was also drafted together with representatives of employers and unions and other stakeholders. As I said, it can be considered one of the moments where not only the European Union didn't only act alone by providing recommendations, but also started to involve stakeholders at the European level. The Bruges Communiqué, it's a package of objectives and actions to increase the quality of vocational education and training in Europe by making it more accessible and relevant to the needs of the labor market. In the slides, you have links to the document, so I invite you to go and visit and read the official text of each of these documents, because as I said, I'm gonna give you some information, but I'm not going to analyze each one of them with you today. After the Bruges Communiqué, another important document is the Riga Declaration that led to the Riga conclusions on a new set of medium-term deliverables in the field of VET for the period 2015-2020. Basically, the Riga conclusions are the result of the review of the short-term deliverables that were approved in with the Bruges Communiqué. So as you can see, there is always a link between each step of the educational policies. The Riga conclusions present the role of vocational education and training in the context of the growth and the jobs agenda and the strategic framework for European cooperation in education and training. So it's also linked to the ET 2020 that was still going, because as I said before, the benchmarks that were foreseen in the ET 2020 were to be achieved by 2020, and here with Riga we are in 2015. But Riga reaffirmed also the support for the European agenda for growth and jobs. The declaration aims also to promote investment in work-based learning by involving social partners, VET providers, business, also develop quality assurance for VET, and to improve the accessibility to VET and qualifications with a more flexible and permeable systems. There are so many other things to be said about the Riga conclusions. One important message is that for the Riga conclusions, VET should be specifically targeted to individual needs so that it becomes a first choice to people who wish to nurture the specific talents rather than a second options. I'm pretty sure that this sentence that was taken, it's a quote that is taken by the Riga document, reminds something of you, because if you think about the words first choice, this is exactly the motto of the European VET Skills Week initiative that the European Commission has put in place since 2015. The last document I want to mention here in this part of my presentation is the Osnabrück Declaration. The Osnabrück Declaration is the most recent document about vocational education and training. It was approved during the German presidency of the European Union at the end of 2020. And it has a specific focus on vocational education and training as an enabler for recovery and just transition to digital and green economies. The main areas of importance for the Osnabrück Declaration are basically the document is structured in different main topics. These topics are addressed at the national level, but also at the international level. And these are resilience in excellence through quality, inclusive and flexible VET, establishing a new lifelong learning culture, sustainability, especially with the link to green skills, and the European education and training area and the international dimension of vocational education and training. So these are topics that are quite familiar, especially in these last years. Sonia, you can go next. So the Osnabrück Declaration mentioned the European education area. This is an initiative that is in place at the moment. The European education area aims at removing the barriers to learning and improving access to quality education for all. And it foresees these 5 subtopics that are linked to quality and equity, to development of teachers, trainers, and school leaders, digital education, green education, but also internationalization of vocational education, going also beyond Europe. This is an initiative that aims to help European Union member states to work together and to build a more resilient and inclusive education and training system. As you can see, there is more and more the willingness to harmonize educational policies, although my opinion is that it will be very difficult to have a unique educational system in Europe, because if you think about these excursus that we have made, education is so much connected to the economic growth of the European Union, and economical policies are too important for member states. And in my opinion, this makes education and training to remain a topic of main responsibilities for member states. But this is my personal idea, and maybe after the presentation we can discuss a little bit about it, and if you have different opinions, I would be very happy to hear about them. But let's move into the final part of this session, that is about educational programs of the European Union, because all these policies and all these initiatives that the European Commission has put in place during the years were accompanied by some initiatives also in terms of funding. You know, the European Commission has established funding programs to support specifically education and training. Since we don't have much time, I'm only referring to those programs that are managed for education and training directly. I'm not going to touch other funding programs, although it would be very interesting, because education and training are so transversal that activities for education and training can be funded also through other funding programs like Horizon, like AMIF, and so on. But in these last slides, I'm going to give you just information about the programs that have been created to fund education and training directly. So these programs are there to carry out the educational policies of the European Union. Basically, all the policies that we have analyzed before are reflected also in the funding programs, and are and some of the objectives that we have seen before can be actually developed through funding opportunities. The first educational program that was launched by the European Commission was the COMET in the 80s. I don't know if any one of you has had the opportunity to work on COMET funded projects. Not me, because I was too young at that time. But maybe it's also another topic of discussion for the end of this, I mean, for the plenary session after the presentation. Then after the COMET, there were other two funding periods, the one from 95 to 99 and the one 2000 to 2006, where the funding program for education and training was Socrates. Socrates first and Socrates second. After the Socrates program, the European Commission launched the Lifelong Learning Program from 2007 and 2015. And after 2015, the next programming period was the one about Erasmus+. There are so many things to be said about all these programs, but I'm afraid we are running late, so I'm not going to get into the details, but in my slides, you also have some text. So if you want to have more information, you can go through the text and you can see what are all the objectives that were linked to each funding program. What I want to highlight, I want to raise your attention on the fact that, as you can see, in the different programming periods, we can highlight the increase of funding from the European Commission for education and training programs. We started with 933 million euros with Socrates to end up with 26 billion with the new Erasmus Plus program. That is the subject of my next slide. The Erasmus Plus program, the one of this current programming period that goes from 2021 to 2027, has the objective to support educational, professional, and personal development of people. It foresees a budget of 26.2 billion euros plus 2.2 billion euros for the EU external instruments, and has some specific priorities that are addressing inclusion and accessibility, digitalization, green transition, and Erasmus Plus for young people. I'm pretty sure that you're all familiar with the Erasmus Plus program because it's the instrument that we have to achieve the objectives of our organizations. My opinion is that European funds should be considered a means to achieve an objective and not a means in itself. It's not just because there are funding that we apply for projects, but it's because we want to achieve some specific objectives in our organizations, and we use European funding to support our the achievement of our objectives. The current Erasmus Plus program is divided into 3 key actions, and this is the topic of my next slide. These 3 key actions are the same as the previous program, although there are some differences because there were some new funding allocated to some new objectives. But for example, key action 1, it's still the key action to fund learning mobility of individuals. And when we talk about individuals, we are talking about not only about learners, but also staff. There is the opportunity to fund mobilities for teachers, trainers, but also for employees working in training centers in order to have job shadowing experiences in other organizations, or to have teaching experiences in other countries. This is also the program that supports the participation of youth in some activities with an European approach. The second key action is the one focusing on cooperation among organizations and institutions. Within these key actions, you have the opportunity to fund partnerships for cooperation. There are those the former the former partnership for cooperation, like in the former Erasmus Plus program. That's not. There are no many changes, but the innovation of this key action is the inclusion of a new kind of funding, which is the one for partnerships for excellence. And this is something that I want to highlight because as VET providers networks, we have worked a lot to pass the message of funding the excellence of training providers. And I have to say that together with EVBB and the other networks, we advocated quite a lot, and we managed to convince the European Commission to dedicate some funding opportunities to the creation of platforms of vocational excellence. There are also partnerships for innovation that are the former knowledge alliances, if I'm not wrong. There are also projects for capacity building, small-scale projects that are meant to be an opportunity for newcomers to get familiar with the management of funding of project funded by the European Union. And there are also some actions for sport events. The last key action is more dedicated to support the policy development and cooperation. So it's there are some funding for youth organizations, but the innovation here is that there are funding for Jean Monnet actions that was in the past only for higher education, but now there is a specific funding for also for vocational education and training. Everything is very well detailed in the Erasmus Plus program guide that is available on the European Commission website. I think that I can stop here. I probably gave you too many information. I hope that everything was clear, and I'm a little bit tired this afternoon, so it was a little bit unlucky to be the last speaker. But anyway, I hope you had the opportunity to learn something more comparing to what you already know. And if you have any question, I would be more than happy to reply to them.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your great presentation. If we have any question, please, you can just jump on the conversation. Yes, Anthony?
I'm sorry for asking all of the questions today, but everything is so interesting, I cannot help myself. And so you did a very good job of presenting the evolution of vocational education training policy in the EU. And personally, I did an Erasmus Mundus master's degree. And so my question relates to this working together to build these common qualifications. So my question is, what is the state of the art of joint vocational education between EU countries? Because this is something that I would be interested in looking onto the future, because there's a lot of this talk about cooperation, but I think it would be a big step forward to have joint vocational titles. And so what do you know about that? What can you tell me?
That's a very, very specific question. And actually, I'm not much into this topic. There are still discussions ongoing about the need to have a common qualification system, especially for vocational education and training. There are some initiatives that were going a little bit into the direction of unifying somehow the system. I'm referring, for example, to the ESCO platform. I don't know if you know about it. But still, I think there is a big resistance from member countries to have this system working as a unified system at European level. Maybe, yeah, Theodore probably wants to add something about that.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Julia, for the very nice presentation. Yes, information is a lot, but I think that this is also the reason we are recording it, because someone should hear it twice, because the information is really a lot. To answer to Anthony, we do have one unlucky event. The fact that the Bologna process has a secretariat. So the universities, they have a secretariat for their attempt. The VET unification does not have a secretariat. What does that mean? That means that we don't have at the European Union permanent staff working towards the unification of the VET system, and this costs a lot in time. But we do have attempts, and there are, if someone has worked on computer, we have assemblers and disassemblers. So we have a key reference, which is the European qualification framework, and every country has a national qualification framework, and there, for specific skills, they have aligned their levels to the level of the European qualification framework. And then we also have the occupational profiles, and also, as Julia said, the ESCO category. So with these three tools, we are trying to overcome the problem that we have a fragmented system. We don't do it very well at the moment. We still have work to do there. But I think that if someone wants to see at the European level the unification process, he has to look into these elements. And this is also a hint for the huge applications, in example, the blueprint ones. All these elements have to be included in the blueprint or the Innovation Alliance, as Julia said, proposals, because the Commission wants us through Erasmus to do these little steps towards the unification of the VET system. So this is one of the goals that we have here. So when you are preparing an application, study these elements and try to include them, or ask us as associations who have at some point the technical knowledge to give you some hints at this point. I don't know if I partially answered your question.
Thanks, Theodore, for contributing also to the answer. It's quite a difficult question because, as you said, there are attempts, but still very, we are in a very vague situation about that.
What I would also suggest to our participants is to read the Osnabrück Declaration. We have also Hans Dahle with us, who participated actively during the preparation of the Osnabrück Declaration. We do have wordings, sentences, and identification of new policies and areas for VET and in general for education that are really revolutionary. They are hidden in the document. In example, we have for the first time the agile education, the agile VET system. So this is something that really contributes and demonstrates the rapid change of the needs of the market and how the VET system can actually adapt at a faster pace because there we have a problem at this moment. So when you read the Osnabrück Declaration carefully, you will see how the calls that the Commission makes, especially the centralized ones, are aligned to what has been included in the Osnabrück Declaration. And then suddenly you will see how the different levels from a policy document to the operational document and the preparation of a project are actually interconnected and connected to each other. This is, I think, one of the areas that people who are not in the let's say hardcore European unification process do not identify immediately, but it is very, very interesting to look into this.
Okay, is there any other question? Any other curiosity?
Okay. Thank you, Julia. If there's no other question, or if some participants want to ask you some questions, maybe you can put on the chat your contact. And like the other.
I think I went a little bit too out of time because we said
no, we are good.
But at the end of the day, we finished at 5. So yeah, whatever you have as a curiosity or question, feel free to reach out. In my presentations, there are, as I said before, texts with more information and also links to read the documents online, especially the declarations and the most important documents that I was mentioning before.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We will send your presentation to the participant like the other presentation. I would like to add for this webinar that we have the training material that is online, is ready for you to use from the 17th June to the 3rd of July on Moodle platform. So you can access to the learning material through the link that I will send you here on the chats. You will need to create an account to access to the learning materials. Tomorrow we will have the second webinar. You all received the agenda, but I will the webinar tomorrow will start at 2 p.m. CET, and we will have 2 presentations from Unit 4, the major milestone and the effect on the European education area, and the Unit 5 on the structure and importance of European framework for education. Maybe Theodore, you would like to conclude this webinar just before I forgot, we have a questionnaire, an evaluation for this webinar. I will send you the link right now on the chat for you to answer individually if you had a great time with us and learned a lot with these expert speakers. And I leave the floor to Theodore.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank to all of you for being here today. This event is mostly limited to our members, and we are very happy that almost every member has participated with at least one participant today, and it's also dedicated to members who have not, and to persons who have not previously a strong experience in the EU policies in the educational area. So tomorrow we have more. I think that both presentations are going to be very interesting because I personally know the speakers, and I'm very happy about their knowledge and their experience. I would also like to thank our participants and of course our speakers today. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye from Slovakia.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.